Here we're at a rig about 13 miles south of Fort Morgan. We're in 65 feet of water. Right now we're about 10 feet below the surface, staring at the barnacles and corals and other creatures encrusting the legs of the rig. And you see just these little fans poking out everywhere. It looks almost like a little garden. And those are the barnacles. There's a little animal inside a barnacle shell that looks a lot like a shrimp, and they're reaching out and grabbing plankton out of the water. And we're out here to measure the oxygen levels, particularly down in the lower part of the water column, because we've been getting a lot of reports of decreasing oxygen levels, especially at depth, due to the dispersed oil being broken down by microbes in the water. And here you just see all these jacks swimming around, and you see all the spadefish in the background. What was unusual at this rig, this was Sunday, what was unusual was all the fish were compressed into this band that began about 15 feet below the surface and ended at about 45 feet. And below 45 feet, for the next 20 feet to the bottom, there were no fish, almost no marine life. We measured oxygen levels down there below 2 parts per million, which is sort of the critical threshold marine life needs to survive. And you just see this is an incredible number of jacks in this area. There are a few amberjack right there. The silver ones are Jack Crevalle. A lot of snapper, some grouper, a lot of spadefish. But what's unusual is when you start looking toward the bottom of the frame, there's a barracuda, you see fewer and fewer fish down below us. And right now we're at about 30 feet, and we're going to start dropping down. Once we hit about 40 feet, about 10 feet below we are now, you notice there are no fish. You see that bottom edge of the frame, and you see no fish. Well, we passed down into this layer, and now we're down on the bottom. We're at about 60 feet right now, and you don't see any barnacles popping out on the legs of the rig. There were still a few alive. Everything wasn't dead, but no crabs, no sea urchins. Anything that can move away from this zone apparently had. Now some fish are going to succumb, but you see there's one little fish there, tiny fish. And then right here we came upon a little dead grouper. Don't know what killed him, could have been the oxygen, but the strange thing, there's nothing eating on him, no crabs, there was nothing down there. Now we're riding along to another rig. We're in a sheen. Right side of the screen you can see normal water. That's the edge of this particular sheen we were in, and this thing was miles wide. Here's a band of oil that was in the sheen. We saw some others that were much thicker. We're now looking at one from in the water, and you can see this stuff is about an inch thick. This is what's washing up on the beaches as the waves of oil and the tar patties and such. It looks just like chocolate. Now we're at a rig about 4 miles off Dauphin Island, and everything looked great at the top. You see the little blennies poking out of the holes there. They're little fish. They dot the rig legs from top to bottom usually. And you'll see some other little fish. It looked great at the surface. Here we're about 15 feet down, a couple little stone crabs arguing over who gets that hole. There's a little soapfish, and there's a sea urchin. Everything looked great up there. But we knew we were in for something different at the bottom. There's a little butterfly fish. Because we've been measuring oxygen levels from the surface, at the bottom of this rig, and we're talking about 50 feet of water, 4 miles off the beach, we found oxygen levels of 0.1 parts per million. That's dramatically lower than the 2 parts per million things need. Now those were hardtails. These are some red snapper. And as we drop down in the water, right now we're at about 30 feet. You notice the visibility is getting a little lower. The colors are starting to drop out. And there's a bunch of red snapper and some mangrove snapper. We're now down on the bottom. We're about 40 feet. Right at 40 feet was kind of the critical threshold. Below that, we saw no more life. And if you look here on the rig legs, you don't see any of the barnacles poking out. Now we're just a few feet off the bottom here. And look out here, we don't see any fish swimming anywhere around the legs of the rig. We don't see any fish at all. And this water would basically be, lethal in terms of oxygen. Now I'm at 43 feet, and once again, no barnacles, just no life down there. When we were offshore a week before, we measured some very low oxygen levels, and we found a lot of marine life right up on the beach. The Sea Lab measured oxygen levels just off the beach that same day in the same area we were, and said they were too low for animals to live.